Happy New Year to all of you. Now, this is going to be a quick video as I'm still working on a bigger project, but don't want to go too long without making a video. So today I'm going to give my opinion and review the second official soundtrack of My Singing Monsters. It was released Christmas Eve, but I thought, what the hell, why not make a video on it a week later? So I will give a brief opinion on each individual song, then an overall critique, and then some thoughts. Now let's start with the first in the album, Celestial Island. Overall, I feel like it's a good representation of the original song, and the few tweaks in track order gives it a unique feel comparatively. It does, however, feel a bit short, and it has a bit of a slow opening, although all things considered, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Next is Firehaven, and I gotta say it was kind of a letdown. Now that's not to say that it's bad, it just doesn't capture that intense feeling the original has, and it almost has a hollowness to it. That I find a bit off-putting. And I have to say that Tweedle's verse would have been better if Flugel was louder. All that aside, it does keep Firehaven's upbeat, fast-paced tempo, giving it a semblance of Firehaven. I'm also surprised they decided to add Gobbledygook when the other seasonals that still haven't been added haven't made it to the other islands. I'll bring this up in my final thoughts. Now, opposed to popular opinion, I actually like Gobbledygook on the Fire Islands, and I respect them adding Gobbledygook to more than just the final verse of Firehaven. Another plus is the fact that the dipsters are barely audible since they are the weakest on Firehaven, in my opinion. But overall, I'd give Firehaven an 8. Then we have Fire Oasis, the better of the Fire Islands in my opinion, but only by a slight margin. Overall, the soundtrack captures the feeling of the original perfectly, and is better than the Firehaven one, but it does feel like it's missing something. Not sure what. And opposed to Firehaven's dipsters, Fire Oasis dipsters are my jam. Definitely my favorite of dipster tracks, and I'm happy their volume wasn't lowered. And also Gobbledygook, greatly implemented. I gotta give this one an 8.5. The third song on the album is Psychic Island. I was so interested on how the magical islands were gonna sound, and I have to say, these 5 are my favorite on the entire soundtrack. My only criticism is they far outclass the originals. So for this one, I have to give it a 9.5. And here are some of the reasons why I gave it such a high score. 1. Starting the song with Periscope and increasing its volume was genius. It gave the soundtrack a great beat. 2. Making Gloptic's other tracks audible is amazing. Now I can actually hear what Gloptic sounds like in the song. 3. Adding a slight echo to Theramine adds to the eerie feel the island gave. The reason I'm not giving it a 10 is because the ending is a bit long, and they could have cut out at least one verse. The next song on the track is Fairy Island, and this one may be a bit controversial, and by that, I think you know I'm referring to Platy's increase in volume. In my opinion, Platy's volume should not have been decreased in-game. For one, it's easier to lower the volume of a monster than it is to increase it, and 2, Platy's sound gave Fairy Island that quirky personality, and opening it with it for the soundtrack was a great way to give the Platy fans a memory of what once was. I don't really have any complaints, other than the change in Clavinet's track, but it doesn't do anything too outstanding, and it isn't really one I'd listen to on repeat, so I have to give it an 8. Then we have Bone Island, and I'm sorry that I'm comparing it to fan-made remixes, but this is how you make a Bone Island soundtrack right. Too many of the fan-made ones have very slow openings, and I've deduced that it comes down to when Wither comes in. Wither is the backbone, pun very much intended, of the song, and holding it back for too long loses the attention of the listener, which is why the Bone Island soundtrack is amazing. Another thing I have to add is the change with Hollow and giving it an increased or a new sound. It helps make the soundtrack distinct from the original without losing that echoey haunting feel. The final praise I have to give it is in the Dencha's verse, where I can almost distinctly hear the trio of Pechidna, Wither, and Banjaw individually, giving that verse much more diversity than in the original, where I only hear Banjaw, with a bit of Wither near the end of each track. So I have to say it, Bone Island is a 10. Guaranteed. Then we have Light Island, easily the weakest of the magical islands, but that doesn't stop its soundtrack from meeting the same fate. My biggest complaint is how repetitive the opening is, and it's also slow. Although unlike other islands with slow openings, the slow opening here fits the feel of the island, since this song is supposed to be calm and serene. And it isn't just a slow start to the song, it's an opening verse that perfectly transitions into the main body of the soundtrack, and might I add, is way better than the original. The change with Spytrap is amazing since it gives the song an intense beat that doesn't make the song a straight-up lullaby. and this change grants a nice transition into the final parts. And I applaud Big Blue Bubble for this island, because they don't just use repetition of verses throughout. They culminate into this pleasing cacophony of music that doesn't drop the momentum and ends with a nice quartet of Flower, Susup, Furcorn, and Potbelly, keeping that intense feeling of the previous verse and ending with a nice instant fade with Furcorn. My verdict on this island is 8.5. Now we have my favorite island, and this one I was afraid wouldn't hold up to the original. Luckily this turned out to be false, since it more than met my expectations. Although I must admit, it isn't my favorite on the album, and I'm only giving it a 9.5. Although all my complaints on the track are minimal at best. 1, I find the use of Fronley as an opening a bit odd, but it works. 2, Ostax is a bit too quiet. 3, Knucklehead should have been made the intense percussion instead of Mushaboom. And 4, Enchantling's Echo was a bit distracting during its first track. Now, those are just nitpicks, and really, this soundtrack is amazing. Next on the album are the Natural Islands. However, I'm going to skip them and talk about them at the end. So next is Starhenge. Now, this, along with the next one, I was surprised to find out weren't on the original soundtrack. I guess they just weren't in the game when the first soundtrack released. Now, the Starhenge track captures the ancient feeling of Starhenge perfectly, and overall, the Starhenge track is very good. My one complaint is Atmos's vocal track, but that's more of a personal preference than a critique. Although it isn't really anything special, it just does its job well, so I'll only give it an 8. Finally, we have Party Island, and I was pleasantly surprised when I heard it. Now, Party Island is by far my least favorite island, solely because of the English vocals that it has. There's just something about "come on over here" that makes me uncomfortable. Yet, somehow, by going all in on the vocals, makes it more tolerable. I think it's similar to why I like the Wordos. Also, the upbeat party vibe it gives off also makes it much more listenable. So, I give it an 8.5. The Natural Islands make an appearance on this album, but this time with Dipsters and Wordos. Not much to say about them, because they're basically the same as the ones from Volume 1, but this does make them better than the originals in my opinion. My favorite of these 5 has to be Earth Island. Now, for final thoughts, I really hope they make a 3rd volume in the future, because I'd love to see what they do for Seasonal Shanty, and maybe some updated Outer Islands from Dawn of Fire. However unlikely, I wouldn't be opposed to 3rd installments of the Natural Islands, with the added Mythicals and Epic Wobbox that are coming out soon. I really wish they waited a year. They could have added these to the 2nd version. We could also have gotten Seasonal Shanty, but I think it's better we got it sooner rather than later, because now there's more for the 3rd volume, if that ever comes out.